welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I would like to share with you my review on the new Winsor & Newton Promarker watercolor markers. Now, I recently saw in my Blick catalog, they had an advertisement for these in the beginning of the year, advertising these now under the Promarker assortment as a new marker. And they're making claims that the new marker is supposed to be rewettable, and you can come back to your work at any time to rewet them and rework into them. And I know that was something of a little bit of a challenge that some people had, or a complaint that some people had with the original release of these markers. Well, I actually have both the first release and the second release, the new Promarker watercolor markers, here in front of me, so I can compare the two and see if there's any difference. I'm going to let you know. So I have some notes off to the side, and real quick before we get started, I'd like to give you a rundown of what you can expect to see in this video. So we're going to be showing swatches, and we're going to be talking about how well they re-wet. I'm going to show you some examples of some work that I've completed using these markers, because I've actually been using them quite a bit. I always like to put a product really through the paces and test it out a lot so that I can make the most informed review as possible. I take a lot of pride in my product reviews. I never do first impression reviews. I think they're ridiculous. We're also going to be talking about the brush tips, labels, pigment information, series numbers, color consistency. We're going to compare them to the pans, and I'm just going to give you overall my opinion on these markers and the benefit of my experience, and then you can make a decision on whether or not you would like to purchase these for yourself. I'm also going to be sharing with you some brush and paper recommendations that I believe will suit you the best if you have a set of these markers. And at the very end, I'm going to share with you a discovery that I have made, something that you can do to prime your watercolor paper to make the most out of these watercolor markers so that they can be as liftable, rewettable, and just perform the absolute best that they can. So don't miss that. Stick around to the end of the video because I think I've got a great tip, you guys. So real quick before we get started, if you haven't already and you would like to, don't forget to hit that thumbs up because it really helps out my channel, and subscribe if you'd like to for more videos, because I post here usually around twice a week. So if you're interested in more product reviews and tutorials, stick around to the channel. I'd love to have you. So right off the bat, let's get the basics out of the way. So with your marker, you are going to have two ends. The first end is a bullet style nib. This is for precision, they're saying. And then on the other side, you are getting that nice brush marker tip. Now, it's my opinion that this is a nice quality foam nib, and it should last you the life of the marker. I've been using these quite a bit. Like I said, I've really put them through the paces, and I've not noticed any signs of wear on the brush end of the marker. The bullet nib, however, is a little bit of a different story. It's not the same quality as what's on the other end. I believe it's a fiber nib, and it's not going to be as durable. In fact, it's kind of ironic because if you saw my haul video where I had originally hauled these markers, and I'll link that up above in the iCards and in the description down below if you're interested, I had kind of made a comment. I'm like, I'm not sure why they give us a brush nib and a bullet nib, but I was just thankful to the art gods that they had not given us a chisel nib because I never use those. Well, I actually turned out to have an appreciation for that bullet nib because as I was using them, I really enjoyed the convenience of switching back between drawing and painting, and that bullet nib really did offer a lot of control. And I can see where stampers and card makers would really be interested in that side of the marker, because especially if you were coloring smaller images, I think that you would find that very handy. But the problem is that it's pretty fragile. It's pretty, I mean, it will last a decent amount of time, but I do think that overall, you know, you really can't bear down a lot of pressure on the bullet nib because it just can't handle it. It is one of those fiber nibs. The brush nib, however, does seem to be a nice foam quality. It's probably as good as what's in a Copic, but it is not as flexible as, say, one of those Prismacolor Premier alcohol markers. So if you wanted to use these for brush lettering or calligraphy, I'm not too sure that this would be your marker. The labels are going to have your color name as well as your color number, as well as a series number, a permanence rating, the pigment information on each individual marker, and your transparency rating, so whether it's transparent or semi-transparent. Now that's a huge selling point for me as a professional artist or anybody who really wants to sell their work or have their work a long time, that unlike most other markers on the market, these markers are archival quality and light fast. Okay, so that's a huge selling point, because when you go in the store and you buy a Copic or something comparable, they're using cheap dye-based inks, and so they're prone to fade really, really rapidly as well, where here we're using pigment-based ink. So that's pretty unique. And of course that permanence rating is very nice as well. Now the series number, I've got everything from 1 to 4, I believe here. This one that I have here, Quinacridone Magenta, is a series 3, but Cadmium Orange Hue is a series 1. Unlike a tube or a pan watercolor, or really any kind of paint, where you see a different series number will reflect in a different price, that's not the story here. So you could just disregard that information completely. The series number does not matter. They're all going to be the same price. If you walk into a big box store, you can expect to pay somewhere around $7 a marker full price, but you can always use coupons, and the current pricing over at dickblick.com is $4.10 a marker. Now that may sound a little bit high, but bear in mind once again that this is professional quality and we're using pigments, not synthetic dyes or inks or colorants like that. So these really are worth the money in my opinion. Another thing that I wanted to mention, just getting the basics out of the way, is that the caps remove really easily. So if you're a hand pain sufferer or you have hand strength issues, I tend to have some hand strength issues, these remove really, really easily, but they're also pretty secure, so they're not gonna the caps aren't gonna be popping off if you have them in a bag. However, they do not stack onto the back. As you can see, you can't stack your caps. It's not a huge issue for me, but I know some of you do like to do that. So while you're coloring, you want to make sure that you have a good idea of which cap goes where. The brush side has a color indicator on it, but the other side does not. And it would probably be a bummer to put your lemon yellow back into, like, say, your phthalo green cap. So just be a little bit careful there. Now, one of the major differences, I wanted to make this point, is if you were wondering what the difference between a watercolor marker and maybe all other water-soluble media were. Let's say you already had watercolor pencils or Inktense pencils or Inktense blocks, and you were wondering, well, do I really need to add this to my collection? Is there something different or unique about these? And I would say yes, because not only are they more like a true watercolor in marker form, but again, going back to if you were a hand pain sufferer or if you had strength issues, if the scribbling with a pencil, like a colored pencil or watercolor pencil, was kind of a lot for you and then you had to activate it, these you get the color instantly. So unlike a watercolor crayon or pencil or block, where the media starts out as a dry media and then you add water to activate, these are already wet. These already start out wet for you. So that's, of course, really, really nice. Taking a look at the swatch chart here that I do have all 36 colors in the range. So the color range is somewhat limited, especially when you compare it to like the range of Copics, for example, which are an alcohol-based marker. So they're not comparable in terms of quality or properties, but I'm saying in terms of having a large range of colors for a marker range to only have 36 colors is pretty limited, but it is a good range of colors. And what I like about it, especially, besides just the fact that they're all light, fast, and good quality, is that they're reusing a limited number of pigments over and over again in these mixtures, which makes it very easy for you to achieve color harmony. So for example, if you wanted to use this shade called Mauve, which Winsor & Newton's Mauve is always beautiful, it's a mixture of the Dioxazine Violet and the Quinacridone Magenta. So if you're using these three shades, let's say, in a painting, it's easy to get color harmony is what I'm saying. Same thing up here with the oranges. The cadmium orange is a mixture of PY3, which is the gamboge, and PR188, which is the cad red. And then the cad red pale here, which is another type orange shade. Again, same thing, a mixture. So they're reusing the same pigments over and over again in their mixes so that it's much easier to achieve color harmony, and I really appreciate that. I feel like the color range is very well thought out. We have a good balance of light to dark. Nothing here is too dark, but we do have some pretty saturated depthful colors like Hooker's Green Dark, Indigo, Sepia, Payne's Gray, and there are 2 blacks. So there's 34 colors and 2 blacks, which I typically don't use black in my watercolor. But because I enjoyed these markers so much, and I'm just gonna, spoiler alert, I'm gonna let you know right now, I love these, you guys. I can't stop using them, and they're my favorite art supply in the studio of the moment. Winsor & Newton has definitely won me back as a fan with these markers. Because I loved them so much, I thought, you know what, I'm gonna go ahead and pick them up and just complete my set. Now, I do have mine stored in this, I keep going out of brush storage. It's a marker storage rack. And I like marker storage racks because you're going to be laying the marker flat that way, so the ink is going to feed out of both ends. Versus, I never recommend it, anytime you have a double-ended marker, do not store them like point up in a cup or something like that, because the ink will flow down to feed one side, but the other side that's up in the air would dry out. So make sure that you're storing them flat. You don't have to have that marker storage thing. I got mine, I think it's from, what is the brand on that? Spectrum Noir, I think, is the brand on that. I've got the black and the clear over there, and they're really great, but you don't have to have them if your budget doesn't allow it. Just store them in a little basket on your desk, and that's going to be just fine. Another note about the color selection is that you have what I would call 4 true pastel shades. You have lemon yellow, pale rose, cerulean, and phthalo green yellow shade, I believe that's called. And you might be thinking, well, can't you just water down, like, for example, permanent rose to get the pale rose shade? And you kind of can, but then if you're going to be paletting everything, you might as well bring a set of pan watercolors with you. This makes it more on-the-go friendly to have some of those lighter, paler shades. Now, for my own sake, and also to show you guys how they would work in a painting, I actually did, and I'm going to show you in a minute, I did a painting using almost exclusively just the pale pastel shades because it made me instantly think of Macaron Cookies, and that's exactly what I did with it. I made some Macaron Cookies, which I have a tutorial that I filmed it. I just have to edit it together so that it's not up yet, but it will be up soon if you guys are interested. So subscribe so you won't miss that if you wanted to see that. And I have some other examples off to the side that I'm going to show you in just a moment. But I like what's going on with this color selection. I would love to see them expand to more colors, but right now it's pretty good. So I wanted to compare the colors to the pans because one of the claims they make is that their paints should match back and correspond with their watercolors in the pan and the tube line. So lemon yellow to lemon yellow, they're a different pigment. And I think the reason for that is that true lemon yellow is a nickel pigment, and we're not using any heavy pigments here. Like, for example, there's no ultramarine blue, there's no true cadmium colors, they're cadmium hues. And I think the reason for that, and the phthalos are what's going to make up your blues, I think the reason for that is because if you used ultramarine blue or any heavy sedimentary color like Prussian, it would clog the brush nib. So none of these colors are going to granulate, unfortunately. If that's an effect that you really like in watercolor, then these markers might not be your favorite thing. So because it's a hue, they used PY3. It's pretty pale and pretty soft and gentle. But so is lemon yellow naturally, but it's very transparent and it's very, very close. The permanent rose to permanent rose, it is the exact same pigment, but I'm not going to lie, the watercolor markers, they're not quite as saturated as the tube colors. They're just a step back in saturation in a lot of cases, and that's another example there. Winsor Violet to Dioxazine Violet, same pigment. That's very good. I'll take that. That's pretty close. Sap Green to Sap Green, pretty close. Yellow Ochre, you know, I actually think the one called Raw Sienna is closer to a true yellow ochre in my opinion, but that's okay. Burnt Sienna to Burnt Sienna, you know, close, very, very close. Phthalo Blue Green shade to Winsor Blue, that ain't bad. So I can tell that they put forth a real effort, and you can see they really did take a lot of time and care, and they put in a real effort, and I'm going to give them an A+ and a pass on that. I think they match pretty darn good. All right, so let's talk about the claims on how they re-wet. Now, that claim that they're making that they will re-wet even when left to dry and you can come back to your work at any time, that's not true. I'm not going to lie to you guys, that is not true, okay? The reality is that they're going to blend much better when the paint is fresh. You want to get in there right away and blend that out. If you let it sit for 10 minutes, 20 minutes, overnight, you're not going to hardly be able to move them at all. And in that way, they remind me somewhat of the Inktense line. If you're familiar with Derwent Inktense pencils and blocks, only these are completely transparent. They are truly a watercolor look, and they truly are watercolor. But, because the Inktense blocks, I feel like, are somewhere between a watercolor and a gouache. They're a little bit cloudy and milky. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I'm just saying, you know, they're not like this. But I feel like once this has been allowed to be blended out and the color is down, it's down. So if you get to it within 5 minutes, you're going to be able to blend it out just fine. But you can see here by my swatches that some of them definitely re-wet better than others. You can see the Cadmium Red Deep here, which is one of their new Promarker watercolor markers. I didn't get to it quite fast enough to blend it out, and you can definitely still see the marker line. But then here, the Alizarin Crimson hue is one of their original ones from the first release, and it blended out just fine. So overall, in my opinion, it's my opinion that they have relabeled these, rebranded them under the Promarker watercolor assortment, but they're the exact same watercolor marker. So if you did not like the first release of these, you're not going to like the second release any better. I don't want you to think that because they're being advertised as new to the Promarker line that they're a brand new product, because the truth, in my opinion, is they're not. They're going to be the same marker. Now, that doesn't bother me because I've got a fair mix 50-50 here. And dickblick.com, when you order from them, they even have a disclaimer that they're in between transitioning stock right now, and that you're likely going to get some older labels, some newer labels, but that they are the same product, which really confirms my suspicions that they've just rebranded them, relabeled them. And I actually think the old labels were prettier and more professional looking, but you know, that's really neither here nor there. That's besides the point. But I have pretty much consistently every time I've ordered these, because now I have the full line, I've gotten a 50-50 mix of the older ones and the newer ones, and they all perform the same exact way. For example, that mid blue is one of the older ones that I have, but then the Phthalo Blue Red shade is one of the newer ones. And they're all brand new to me. They're all brand new fresh markers, but the first release, you know, to the second release, the second series, if you will, and they didn't blend out any better. Maybe the blues definitely set the quickest. It's something that I noticed right away, is that you got to get to the blue immediately and it's probably because they're phthalo pigments, but they do set very, very fast. And that's just consistently throughout the line, is that you want to get to them quickly to blend them, like almost instantly, because if you leave them to sit, you're not going to be able to re-wet and reactivate and remove them. But that can be an advantage, because once it's locked down, you can then go over it with anything that you want it, color pencil, gouache, etc., and not worry about disturbing the layer underneath. So for me, it's an advantage, and I really feel like these open up a whole new world to watercolorists. They're a lot of fun. For me, They are a lot of fun. Now, when you purchase these now in a set, this is the insert from the acrylic box that I got. They come in a plastic acrylic box. They used to come in a nice metal tin, but of course now that I buy them, they don't come in that tin anymore. They come in the acrylic box. And I had started with this 12 set of landscape tones, which if you were going to get any limited set, they come in sets of 6, 12, and then open stock. I would get this set because I think it's the most useful and the most versatile, and then maybe add one of these clear primary yellows. This set comes with lemon yellow, raw sienna, burnt sienna, cadmium red deep, burnt umber, Payne's gray, indigo, phthalo blue red shade, cerulean blue, dioxazine violet, hooker's green dark, and sap green. And I just think it's so much more useful and versatile than their typical assorted 12, but of course it's going to be personal preference. Alright, so the first thing that I painted with these when I first got these home was this sweet little iris flower. I chose an iris flower because one of the first reviews that I had done on this channel was actually on a super cheap set of dye-based watercolor markers that I had picked up at Hobby Lobby, and they were like 33 cents a marker. They were ridiculously cheap. And I had done an iris flower for that, so I figured why not revisit the idea and do it again in the spirit of watercolor marker reviews. And I'm very pleased with how this came out. I have a tutorial on this. It's not up yet either, but I did film it. I'm going to put it together, narrate it, so if you're interested in seeing how this comes together and learning how to paint this flower, make sure that you subscribe to the channel because it will be up soon. So for this flower, I used the dioxazine violet, the quin magenta, the mauve, and like I had mentioned earlier, because they keep reusing the same pigments over again, I was able to achieve color harmony. I felt like I was flying when I was painting with these. I had a ball. I had a lot of fun painting with them, and it built up so quickly, and it really, time went by like that because I was able to keep switching back and forth between drawing and painting, and it was a lot of fun. Now their sap green is incredibly vibrant and too vibrant to be a believable green. So what I would do is that pale rose shade, I found that came in handy a lot. By the way, the color indicators on the labels seem to correspond pretty well with the actual color, so that's good. I found this color to be really useful because not only could I use it for lighter things and for highlighted areas to kind of reserve that area, but I would also base coat my green area out with this first and then go over it with the sap green, and that way I could achieve a much more natural green, and it would still be very harmonious with everything else that was going on because this color is in the flower as well. So I really enjoyed that, and for this first demonstration I mixed everything on the page because I wanted it to be free and fast and loose, and I wanted to see how much I could do just mixing on the page, no paleting anything, because again, one of the selling points I think of this would be the convenience and the immediacy of this medium versus having to bring a set of watercolors with you and maybe a bucket of water and a brush. You know, I just wanted to see how they would work sort of just mixing on the page, and I did feel that the markers performed best that way. But for my second demonstration that I did here, I did this, I've got a glassine piece over it, I did this sweet little blue jay. And for this one, I wanted to palette almost everything. I hope you're going to be able to see that on camera. But if not, I'll insert a picture. I wanted to palette almost everything off to the side because I just wanted to see how they would work in a completely different technique as a traditional watercolor. So I would wet out an area, I would scribble a marker off on a palette, grab that color, and then drop it in. They flow beautifully wet into wet. They perform just the way that I would expect them to. But bear in mind, just like in Inktense, you're really not going to be able to do a lot of lifting with these. So again, kind of once they're down, they're down. I also, this was a pen and ink style. I did not film this. I also used some white gouache. This is the Winsor Newton Designer's gouache in the permanent white shade. And I have to tell you, their white gouache is like, the permanent white at least is my favorite. It's pretty good. I was able to tint the gouache any color I wanted using the marker. So I would scribble the marker off, mix it with the gouache. They're very compatible. It worked great. And I recommend that if you're going to be paletting these at any time, use a porcelain plate or a porcelain dish to mix on, because for whatever reason, and I'll insert a clip of how well they lay down on the porcelain. It doesn't beat up on the porcelain. I was able to get more saturation, a nice saturated layer. It worked so beautifully on the porcelain, but it didn't work as well on metal for whatever reason. I also swatched them out on this paper. This is the Strathmore mixed media paper 500 series. It's 100% cotton, archival quality, acid free. And what I liked about this, why I picked this up recently, and I've got a review coming in the future on this too, was that because it's 100% cotton, if I liked the work that I made in the sketchbook, I could take a X-Acto blade and very carefully cut it out and sell it if it was something that I wanted to do, if I really liked how it came out. Anyway, so I swatched it on this surface to see the colors here, and I think in many cases the colors came out a little more vibrant on the mixed media paper, likely due to the fact that this has a vellum surface. But I do think that for water media, this can be a little bit fragile, and it can't handle lifting or scrubbing, this paper. So I still like it, but just to let you know, I wouldn't really recommend it for the watercolor markers. Now for the last example that I have to show you guys, this was also done again on that mixed media sketchbook, but a larger one that I had picked up at the same time. And I did these sweet little macaron cookies. I love these. I love how they came out. And I did film a tutorial on these as well. So if you're interested, be sure to check out the channel. Keep checking back because this will be up soon. Like I said, I wanted to see how the pastel tones would work together in painting. The lemon yellow, the pale rose, that phthalo green yellow shade. Now it occurs to me that it is possible that maybe it's not meant to be that light, the phthalo green yellow shade. Because the color indicator, I'm not so sure. The color indicator is quite much darker on that. So I'm not sure if that's intentional or not, but I know that a friend of mine has the pale rose and the lemon yellow, and that's definitely supposed to be that way. So I don't know if it's a happy accident or what, but I used it to my advantage when I did these sweet little macaron cookies, and I'm obsessed with how it came out. So like I said, I used the markers. I used a little bit of white gouache. There's something about these watercolor markers that just seems to free me. It makes me feel like I can break all the rules. That's why I picked up the black, even though I don't use black in regular transparent watercolor. Here I'm using these markers, and it kind of makes me feel like I'm doing mixed media. So, and I'm in my mixed media sketchbook, so I can grab in some color pencils. I can grab in some gouache. It just seems to like break all the chains and ties that bind us as artists when we put rules on everything. And I don't know, I loved how this came out. It's so happy and bright and cheerful, and the colors were very beautiful. I did a background that was very flowy, wet into wet. They bloomed a lot. Now here's the thing I do notice about these markers. I think that they have a tendency to create hard edges. It's just a feeling that I have, but no matter what paper I use it on, and this demonstration I did on the Strathmore 500 series hot press watercolor paper, which is my favorite hot press paper, and it is my paper recommendation. I'm going to talk about that in just a second more. But this is the Arches hot press. This is the mixed media, and it has that same effect. Unlike regular watercolor where you can get soft lines, I feel like they do have a tendency to have a halo around the watercolor after you blended it out. It's not a big deal for me, but it's more noticeable in lighter shades versus the darker shades, and it's just something I wanted you to be aware of. But yeah, I love these. I love these macarons. They came out so sweet and happy and spring and bright and cheerful, and I had a lot of fun working with these markers. Probably more fun than I would have had if I was just working with regular watercolors. Alright, so at this point in the video, what I want to do is I want to give you my paper recommendations. My absolute favorite paper for these markers, and really anytime you need a hot press paper, is going to be the Strathmore Ready Cut Watercolor 500 series hot press paper. I'm going to bring it in, but it's a shiny package and there's going to be some glare on it probably. But this is what it looks like, and they recently repackaged the front, but it's the same paper. This paper is 100% cotton, it's acid free, it's archival, and what's a little bit unique about their hot press is that it's much more durable than a lot of other hot presses. For example, the Arches here that I have, and I did a review on this, I'll link it up if you're interested. The Arches hot press watercolor paper, while it is very smooth, it also has a tendency to get fuzzy and peel up really easily. It can't handle lifting or scrubbing, or really a lot of those traditional watercolor techniques that you like to do, and forget about using an eraser on that paper. I mean, it's so fragile, it stains easily, it doesn't accept a lot of layers either. But this one, this is the best hot press I've ever tried. The Strathmore, again, 500, not the 400 series, the 500 series hot press. This paper has just the tiniest bit of texture to it. It still looks completely smooth. It still is a hot press, but it's just got enough texture to it that the surface is much more durable, and it can hold up to some lifting. It can hold up to the abrasion or the friction that the marker is going to cause. So when it comes to choosing a paper, bear in mind that with any brush marker that you have, it's really a double-edged sword. You have to kind of pick your poison a little bit, because if you choose a cold press watercolor paper, you're choosing to sacrifice your brush nib, because that, especially in Arches cold press, it's very textured, and that friction of the marker across the surface of the cold press is going to tear your brush marker apart. It's really going to wear the nib down much quicker. If you choose a hot press a lot of the time, like the Arches hot press, from the friction you're going to be tearing up the surface of the paper but preserving your brush marker. So this paper I feel is like the best of both worlds, but it's still a hot press and you do still need to be somewhat gentle. If you're used to using alcohol markers where you use a lot of windshield wiper motions or scrubbing kind of motions, circular motions to blend the color, get out of that habit. I had to learn to get out of that habit. I feel like you're going to get a much better result and preserve the paper if you just do some gentle strokes in one direction. Be gentle. Don't go rubbing until you dug yourself a hole in that paper. And the other thing is that I wouldn't come in when the paper is wet and use the marker. What I mean by that is, wet into wet, you wet out an area with your brush and then come in with the marker, because just like any other paper, your paper is going to be the most susceptible to damage and the most fragile when it's wet. And so the friction of that marker across the paper surface when it's wet, you can't handle it. It's going to start to come up. Any hot press paper, or really any paper at all, I think it's going to come up. So I got the best results, I feel like, on this paper, and I really like that paper a lot. I also liked the results I got on the Strathmore mixed media, but this paper is not as durable. It couldn't hold up quite as well as this one could. So just to let you know that there. But I was still happy with the work I produced on it. It's still good. Now for some brush recommendations, I recommend these really inexpensive Royal Langnickel Zen watercolor brushes or mixed media brushes. I'm not sure how they're, sometimes they label them either or. The rounds and the filberts, because there's just a little extra stiffness to them. The Simply Simmons is really good, and the great thing about these Golden Taklon brushes is that they're very affordable. I would not use your good watercolor brushes, your Squirrel or Kolinsky Sables, because you're going to be laying down a strip of color and then coming in with your brush to kind of do a gentle scrubbing motion to dissolve the color, and you don't want to wear on your good brushes, but also it's, you want something that's not so stiff that it's damaging the paper either. So these are a great happy medium. So anything that would work great for gouache is going to work good for these, or any watercolor pencils or water soluble media. All right, so before I let you guys go, I promised you a really great tip and I'm going to deliver on it. I have discovered, and it came to me that this would be a good idea, something that you can do to prime your paper that's going to make them the most liftable. So we talked about how if you let them sit too long, you're going to have some problems dissolving the pigment. And that's true no matter what you do. But if you're still struggling, even when you're getting there as quickly as you can, I suggest that you prime the paper first with some gum arabic solution. Do a gum arabic wash, not full gum arabic. I did 1 part gum arabic to 5 parts water. I washed over this square and I allowed it to dry thoroughly. And on this side I did nothing. So this side's been primed with the gum arabic wash and this side has not been. Gum arabic, if you're unfamiliar, is just the binder in watercolor. So you're not introducing anything new or foreign into the solution. It's completely compatible. I allowed it to dry for 5 minutes. I set a timer. So I scribbled 4 shades of blue. I chose blue intentionally because they are the most difficult to dissolve. That phthalo blue red shade, the indigo, really difficult, and the mid blue as well. So I scribbled the cerulean, the mid blue, phthalo blue red shade, and the indigo. Did it on both sides, set a timer for 5 minutes and let them dry. And then I came back to re-wet and blend them. The side that I had primed with the gum arabic, as you can see, dissolved so much better. And I think it looks more vibrant because the paint is sitting more on top versus it didn't soak in as much. Over here you can definitely see that while I could still move the color some, and I did, you can definitely still see those marker lines. It's still obvious this was drawn on with a marker. Now, that's part of the charm, I think, too. If you like that look, like you want to do some sketchy lines and have it obvious it was drawn with a marker, that's fine. Nothing wrong with that. And I encourage you to try that because I think you might like that look. But if you really wanted rid of that and you're frustrated, I think this could really help. Down here, I tested to make sure that it would still layer, and they did. And then here, I did a lift test. So this was primed, same thing with the gum arabic solution, allowed to dry before I scribbled on the marker. And over here, I didn't. And you could see that this is a really cheap student grade paper, and it's very well sized because it's meant for beginners who are going to make a lot of mistakes. So I was still able to lift some on the unprimed side, but on the primed side I was able to lift practically back to white, so it definitely lifted up better. So dissolved better, more vibrant, and lifted better if it had been primed with gum arabic. And there's also lifting solutions that Winsor & Newton makes that you might try priming your paper with first as well if you're really having that struggle. I didn't find it to be a huge issue for me, but everybody is different, and you might find that to be a big problem. So I wanted to make sure that I offered you a tip before I let you guys go. I also want to show you on camera, I'm going to take this cadmium red deep hue and we're going to dissolve this one together. Now you can see just how vibrant and beautiful that is. I do feel like they could have a slightly more vibrant red in the collection. I wish they would expand the color range. The reds are a little weak to me, but it's still pretty good. Now, get in here right away. I'm using a round Taklon bristle brush. Look how well I'm able to dissolve that. There's no problem dissolving that. And then I could drag the color down, and you can see how well I was able to get rid of those lines completely. But here on my swatch, same color, I wasn't because I let it sit. So that's a little tip for you guys. You can see just how much better I could dissolve this because I came in when it was still fresh. So you can dissolve them, but you're going to want to get to them right away. So I hope this video was helpful. I hope you've got value from this video. If you did, don't forget to give me a thumbs up and subscribe for more videos. Leave me some comments. If you have any questions, I'd be very happy to answer them. And as always, have a great day, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.